Today I'm going to talk to you about the different options you have for how to end one sentence and begin the next one. Some of what I talk about will be a review, but I thought it would be helpful to have all of this information in one video. So your first two options are punctuation options, the period and the semicolon. Both of these options enable you to end one sentence and begin another one without making any sort of comment about the relationship between the two sentences. As I hope you know already, a period is a hard stop. It's like driving in Philadelphia and seeing a red light and stopping your car. It enables the reader to take a pause, reflect back, and make sure that they understood what you wrote, and then to continue on to the next sentence. The second option is a semicolon. You can only really put a semicolon wherever you can put a period, but a semicolon is like a stop sign in Philadelphia. You tap your brakes so that your brake lights light up, and in that way you're acknowledging that you should stop, but you continue to drive. A semicolon is saying to the reader, I understand that technically this sentence is over, but I would like you to continue reading because I feel that this second sentence is very connected to the first one. So what you're doing is taking two complete sentences and saying to the reader, I want you to think of both of these complete sentences as if they are both one sentence. So here are two examples. The tide is out, the surfers are dead is something silly that my friends used to say to each other in high school. So since it doesn't mean anything, I thought it would be a good phrase or a sentence to use to show you these different techniques. So the first one's the period, the tide is out, hard stop, the surfers are dead. Option two, the tide is out, keep going, reader, the surfers are dead, which suggests that there's a relationship, some sort of connection that feels important between the tide is out and the surfers are dead. That's it for the pure punctuation marks. The rest of the options include adding other words to the sentences. When you add words in the space in between two complete sentences, you are asking the reader to think a little bit about the relationship between the two sentences, as opposed to just saying hard stop, soft stop. So the first technique is called comma plus fanboys. Fanboys is a way to remember the words that this rule affects. So the words are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. All of these little words have a message to give the reader about the relationship between the two sentences, and if you choose to use one of these words in between two complete sentences, you must include a comma before the fanboys. For example, the tide is out, notice the comma, and the surfers are dead. That means that both of those things have happened. But if I say the tide is out, comma, but the surfers are dead, that suggests to the reader that the surfers being dead is a surprise. You didn't think it would happen. And this highlights a really important point about the fanboys. Often, they will show you the direction in which the sentence is going. If I say, I really like you, and you can assume that something good will happen because and says that we're going in the same direction. So for example, if I said, I really like you, and here's some cake, that would be an example of the sentence going in the same direction. If I wanted to change the direction of the sentence, I might say, I really like you, but. And if you hear the but, you understand that I'm going to be going against the general positive feeling of I really like you and turning around to something negative. I might say, for example, I really like you, but I cannot give you any cake. So notice that these little tiny words have a really important impact on the meaning of the sentence and the relationship between the first sentence and the second. If I said the tide is out or the surfers are dead, that means that only one of these two things can be true, not both. If I say the tide is out, so the surfers are dead, I'm saying the surfers died because the tide went out. So you can't just slap any old word in here. You got to think about what the word is saying. For and nor, the F and the N, are not as frequently used, but I do want to show you what it looks like. The tide is out, for the surfers are dead. That means that because the surfers have died, the tide is out. And you can hear that that sounds a little bit fancy and maybe a little bit old-fashioned. And then the other one is the tide is out, nor are the surfers are dead. Now do notice that when you use nor, you do a change. So you don't say the tide is out, nor the surfers are dead. And I'm hoping you can hear that that sounds kind of wrong. You have to sort of flip the verb here. You take the verb, the are, and you put it in front of the subject, which is the surfers. In general, you're not going to use these last two options, but if you do, remember that you need to put a comma before them. The next option is actually very similar to the comma fanboys in that it has something that you put between two sentences that tells you about the relationship between the two sentences, but it's not one of the fanboys. So in other words, if you are using a word or a phrase between two complete sentences, and that word or phrase is not for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, it is what we call a conjunctive adverb. And a conjunctive adverb, like a comma or like a fanboys, shows the relationship between two sentences. But I think of it as a conjunctive adverb as a sort of bigger, stronger, wordier, longer option for what to put between the two sentences. So, for example, you might say, the tide is out, in addition, the surfers are dead. That's very similar to the tide is out and the surfers are dead, but in addition feels a little bit heavier to me, and it's got more letters. So that's kind of a rule to be able to distinguish between when you need only a comma and when you need a semicolon on one side and a comma on the other. So the rule is semicolon plus conjunctive adverb plus comma. Another example could be, the tide is out, however, the surfers are dead. And hopefully this reminds you of the sentence, the tide is out, but the surfers are dead. However is just a slightly fancier way to say it, and if you're going to use it, you need the semicolon on one side and the comma on the other. Here's another example. The tide is out, semicolon. On the other hand, this could be an example of the or fanboys. On the other hand, the surfers are dead. Or the tide is out, semicolon. As a result, comma, the surfers are dead. And this is very similar to the so. So you can see that in between sentences, you could use a smaller kind of word, or you could use something heavier, wordier, longer, but if you do, you need a semicolon on one side, on the comma on the other. I will give you this list, but I do want to show you that there are actually quite a few conjunctive adverbs that you can use, and each one will show a different kind of relationship between the two sentences. Next means one thing happened, and then the next thing happened. Furthermore means one thing happened, and also another thing happened. So as you are writing, you might want to have this list in front of you because it's a nice list of different sorts of ways to connect sentences. The last option is to use what we call a subordinating conjunction. I like to call those cliffhanger words, and hopefully you remember that a cliffhanger word creates a feeling in the reader of wanting to know what happens next. A cliffhanger word creates a dependent clause, and a dependent clause is not a complete sentence. A dependent clause is like a dependent child. It needs an adult to be connected to it in the same way that a dependent clause needs an independent clause to be connected to it. So here are some words that make dependent clauses: if, because, when, since, and once. And you have two choices here. You could make the first sentence a dependent clause, if the tide is out, and then you would need to attach it to a complete sentence: the surfers are dead. You could flip it too. You could say, the surfers are dead, that's your complete sentence, and here's your dependent clause, if the tide is out. Notice that if your sentence begins with the cliffhanger word, you need a comma in here. If you put the cliffhanger word at the beginning of the second sentence, then you do not need a comma. Here's another example. Because the tide is out, there's my cliffhanger word, so there's my comma, the surfers are dead. Or flip it, the surfers are dead because, no comma, the tide is out. The way that I think about this is that you have to put something in between these two complete sentences. You could put the cliffhanger, or you could put the comma, but you don't put both. Some other examples. When the tide is out, something, something. Since the tide is out. Once the tide is out. Hopefully you can start to begin to feel how this creates a sense in the reader of wanting to know what happens next. So I hope that this made sense. I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions, please bring them to class. And I look forward to discussing all of these exciting options with you.